Hello and welcome to LarpWright. Post-commentary today, which is strange in this scene. I'm going to show you how to make a Larp form weapon, a sword to be exact, but for the sake of time and because it fits better into the camera frame, I'm going to show you most of what I'm doing on this dagger. So let's get started. You need lots of different tools and materials to make foam weapons. I will explain them as they come up and also leave a Google Docs in the description down below. First you need a core. The most common one is fiberglass. I'm using a 8mm thick fiberglass core. I've experimented with carbon fiber core before, but I found they are not worth the extra expense, and only really for very special weapons might be viable. First, you need to cut your core to the desired length. I bought 150 centimeter long cores, and I want the core for my longsword to be 110 centimeters. So I'm measuring it with my measuring tape, marking it, and then I wrap it tightly with duct tape. That is to keep it from fraying out when I cut it with my saw. I'm using a thin Japanese style wood saw, and I'm using rubber gloves and breath protection. I'm not sure if you can get cancer from fiberglass, but it itches like hell when you get it on your skin, so I certainly don't want to get it in my lungs. And with this wood saw, it's quite easy to cut it down. Notice I marked it again on the duct tape, because of course once I marked it and put duct tape over it I couldn't see the mark anymore, so I marked it twice. The next step is to sand the fiberglass cores to roughen up the surface so that the glue will stick better to it. That's a general step you have to do when you want to glue something together. You have to roughen up the surface so it creates a larger surface area for the glue to stick to. Then of course I clean it. Again, wear rubber gloves, wear breath protection. Now we come to the foam. I'm using Plast Sote, or short PZ, PZ 45 to be exact, which means it weighs 45 kg per cubic meter. Here I'm using a metal rail from a metal shelf, which lets me mark just 2 spots on the foam and then cut along the rail with my carpet knife, with my brake knife. You can use cheap blades for a brake knife if you want to, but the more expensive ones are nicer to work with because they will last longer, they will be sharp longer. Here I'm measuring the tips for the weapons. This foam is exactly as thick as my core, which is 8mm. And these tips will be just as wide as the core, 12mm, so I measured this with the core, and now I'm sanding it from all sides, again to make the glue stick. Now it's time to glue the tip to the core. I'm using a glue called Fix, which is usually used to glue shoe soles to shoes. It glues leather, rubber, foam, plastic really well together. And you can use it as a contact glue. That means you apply the glue to both surfaces you want to glue together, then you let it dry for about 10 minutes until it's dry to the touch. and then firmly press the two pieces together and the glue will stick. And that makes it very convenient to work with. You can use other glues, for example, Patex Compact I've used in the past, it's good. As long as it stays flexible after drying out, you can use it for the foam weapons. It has to be flexible because the weapon itself has to be flexible. Here you see me cutting some small pieces of Kevlar fiber. This is to reinforce the tip so it can't poke through the foam, and to make sure the tip does not get ripped off the weapon, it does not shear off. That has happened to me in the past. So now I'm securing the tip with Kevlar. In the past I've used glass fiber or leather. The leather works reasonably fine, just use thin pieces of leather and use it similar to what I'm doing now. But I found glass fiber is too weak a material, which is strange because it's impossible to tear apart by hand. But it did tear apart in the last few weapons I built with glass fiber. So now I'm using Kevlar, and I'm very happy with the results of the Kevlar reinforced weapons. I used my Curl Fix as a regular glue and just glued like a flag onto the tip where the core and the foam intersect and let it dry. And now I'm using it as a contact glue again. I'm soaking the Kevlar in the glue and also putting it on the surface of the foam and the fiberglass core. I'm letting it dry until it's dry to the touch. And now I can wrap it around tightly, really securing the foam tip to the fiberglass core. Press it together firmly, and you're done. Now it's time to do the sides of the blade. First, I'm measuring where the handle's going to be, so I leave about 2 centimeters for the pommel, then enough space for my grip, for my hand to be, and for the crossguard, and I'm marking that. Now I'm cutting the foam to length. And of course I'm making a double-edged sword, so I need 2 pieces. Again, sand all the surfaces you want to glue together, so the glue will really stick. I'm using just regular sandpaper. I think it's about 80 or 160 grit, so quite rough stuff. And with the foam you just have to roughen up the surface a bit. Get the dust off, and you're ready to glue. I'm gluing both sides at the same time here. It's a bit easier to do one at a time. And make sure there's glue everywhere on the core, especially in the area of the tip, which will be under the most stress and where the Kevlar wrapping has created an uneven surface. So I always make sure I get it well covered in glue. Don't need a thick layer of glue, a thin one is actually better, but make sure it's everywhere. This is a trick to make sure your glue doesn't dry out after you stop using it. Just close it up, then turn it around a bit so the glue can sink into the small gaps that are left in the lid. It goes for buckets of paint as well. When gluing this together, be careful to have it centric, because at this point it's really hard, almost impossible, to correct any mistakes. As soon as you press it together, it will stick. Press it together everywhere, firmly onto the core. Once again, especially at the tip. Found out I can pull these little pieces of cloth into a more diamond-like shape, which will make them fit better into my weapon. I actually made these a bit too wide. You will see later on when I shape my weapon, this little piece of fiberglass will poke out at the tip and I will have to cut it back. So you might want to make this a little bit thinner. I think these flags are actually overkill. The Kevlar tip should hold just with the wrap I already did. But if there's a thing worth doing, it's worth overdoing. So I put some glue on the foam in the core, put the flag on the glue, then I soaked the flag in more glue, and now I'm making sure that I have a good thin layer of glue all over my piece. Once again, spread the glue on both surfaces you want to glue together. Have them roughed up with sanding paper and have them clean. So I was building this on autopilot and didn't realize I was using the same 8mm thick foam for the sides I also used for the innermost layer. So I had to recut some 6mm thick foam pieces, reapplied the glue, and now I'm pressing them together firmly. Time for the other side. Now, after gluing this together, I will set it down for the glue to dry overnight. Put it on a clean piece of table there, put a board on it, and weigh it down. That goes good for a dagger, but the sword is a bit longer, so I'm using these clamps to clamp it between two wooden boards. Make sure they're clean and there's no glue on the boards or on the weapons, or you will glue to the boards. And clamp it down with some force but not so much force you are crushing the weapon. Just needs to be held together firmly. Doesn't need to be completely flattened or anything. After it has dried overnight, it's time for the next step, which is shaping the blade. You can use your carpet knife for that, but I found that my knife skills are not up to the task, so I'm shaping it with a belt grinder, a belt sander. I've got a really nice model you can clamp to your table, so I can control the weapon with both hands. Used an oscillating grinder in the past, which worked well enough, especially on the PZ45. Didn't work at all on Iwasoti. But the belt grinder works just fine on Iwasoti, and it really makes short work of the foam. And I found I can just make a more consistent and precise shape than I can with the cutter, hand grinding or an oscillating grinder. What I'm doing first, I'm refining the basic shape of the weapon. I want this dagger to be a bit thinner at the tip than at the base of the blade. So I'm grinding it from each side, always checking that I'm not taking off too much. At this point you can't really add material to it, you can only take it off. Now I'm making the tip of the weapon by rotating it while grinding, and always checking to get it symmetrical as best as I can. Now I'm starting with the edges. Try to hold it at a steady angle. Try to get the same angle on every edge. And once again, I'm only taking a bit off each time, and I'm constantly checking and rechecking that I get it right, that I get it symmetrical. Here you see me using my scissors to cut off the excess Kevlar fiber that is sticking out at the tip of the blade. It's not really a problem, but it's an annoyance, an inconvenience. It could have been avoided if I had made the small Kevlar pieces even smaller, certainly thinner. And this gives me the blade. Now I'm making a template for the crossguard. I have some thick paper here I used to make the template out of. And I found that by folding this paper I can get it quite symmetrical. Right now I'm experimenting with different shapes to get it just to the size I want it to be. I've made a smaller one, and I transfer this to this yellow piece of PVC plastic. This is a 3mm thick piece of PVC, and PVC is a thermoplast, so when you heat it up with a heat gun, you can easily form it and also easily cut it with your carpet knife, which I found to be easier than cutting it out with a jigsaw. Of course, I'm wearing gloves because this gets very hot. You don't really need to reinforce your crossguard with PVC if it's just regular straight crossguard, but you have to reinforce it in some way or it will rip off. So you might use your Kevlar again and sandwich it just like you did the blade or the tip of the sword, or use a thick piece of leather. But I wanted to show you a more advanced technique. With this PVC I can shape it and have a more fancy crossguard, or even a complete basket for the hand protection. And it will be quite sturdy, but not too inflexible if I use this PVC as the core of my crossguard. And this piece of PVC I've now shaped with the hot air gun will be sandwiched between two pieces of foam. I'm using the 6mm thick foam I used for the top and bottom of the sandwich of the blade as well. And that's how it's going to be assembled. I'm refining the shape. In the background, just off screen there, I have a canister of water I'm using to cool down my plastic more rapidly. And now I'm just getting it into its final shape. And this is how it's going to be assembled. So, once again, roughening up all the surfaces, applying the glue to both surfaces, make sure it's uniform. Dry for 10 minutes, then press it together. One more time. That is a bit tricky because it's round. Now, I want this to really be secured to the fiberglass core, so I'm using a 2-component epoxy glue, which will really secure the PVC crossguard to the fiberglass core. I'm mixing up a bit of it and I'm trying to get it into the gap between the PVC and the glass fiber core, and let this dry overnight. Now it's secure, And it's time to glue in the last piece of the sandwich for the crossguard. Now, while the glue is still not fully hardened, you can still press the two pieces together if it's not completely glued together, not completely set yet. I'm doing this occasionally while I'm using my belt grinder to refine the shape of the crossguard. Don't grind off too much at this point. Now, time for the pommel. The pommel will again be made out of 3 pieces sandwiched over the core. And also 2 small pieces of Kevlar fabric to spread the force that is applied to the pommel, spread it over a larger area and secure it more firmly to the core. This will become the middle layer of the sandwich. So I'm marking where the core needs to go. Just using a regular ballpoint pen to mark this. Cut it out. Make sure not to cut into the foam where you don't want to be any cuts. And now it's time to glue it all together. Make sure you roughen up the surface, have a clean surface again. And what I will do here is I will form the sandwich with the 3 pieces of foam and the 2 pieces of Kevlar between them, and I will form the sandwich before I glue it to the core. Because I thought it would be much easier to shape my pommel, to cut it to shape and to grind it to shape if it's not yet glued to the weapon. That's also why I made the crossguard after grinding the blade to shape. The crossguard would have just gotten in the way of me grinding the blade. Once again, contact glue. And now I am carving the pommel to shape. So I'm using a fresh blade for my carpet knife, then marking down roughly where I want my cuts to be. I'm carving it to shape like I would peel a potato. But I'm not really good with the knife, so I have to refine the shape with the sanding paper, and ultimately I'm using my belt grinder again to get the desired shape. Now, secured to the fiberglass core, I want it to be really clean at this point, so the glue really sticks. So I'm using washing gasoline to get off any fat stains. And I get a lot of glue in there. wipe off the excess glue, and then I set it to dry overnight. Set it in an upright position like this. Here I'm gluing a small decal onto the pommel, or you can use a soldering iron to melt in or basically carve in any details you want to have on your blade. I don't have any such details on this blade because it's a rather simple blade actually. But if you want to carve some runes into it or some decorative carvings, you can do it easily with a soldering iron. That's what I'm demonstrating here. Writing down Larp. Now you want to let this dry for about 2 days, so all the solvent goes out of the weapon before you start painting it. For painting it, I'm using rollers. I found that to be the easiest way to get a uniform paint on it, and it's the easiest way for me. You can use brushes as well, or even an airbrush gun if you have something like that, but I'm using rollers. I like my rollers. Get lots of rollers because the latex will destroy the rollers after a few uses. And then just roll a uniform coat of latex paint all over the weapon. Really get it into there, especially with the first layer. But be careful not to apply too much so you don't have running paint noses or huge blobs. Don't forget anywhere, don't forget the pommel. You will need about 5 to 10 layers of this pure latex. I did 7 layers, what you can see here. Don't forget the pommel. And now it's time to start with the actual color. I'm using these pure color artesian pigments. You can use something like water-based or acryl-based colors as well. Some people swear by miniature colors, but I found this artesian pigments gives me the best result because it doesn't dilute my latex paint. So I'm just using this glass, this marbled glass, to mix it. Just pour it in there and then shake it for about 5 minutes. Here I'm using a small piece of foam to test how the color comes out, because it will change color once it dries, so I'm testing how the color comes out on this small piece. And I'm using a small black piece to test the other colors I'm mixing. The black looks good, dark enough after drying. And here you see me using a nylon sock to filter the color, so there aren't any lumps of the color pigment in the paint I'm applying to the weapon, and I get a nice uniform coat of paint. And I'm usually using a black base all over my weapon. And you need about 2 layers of black. Now, I've mixed some brilliant silver paint for the blade. And I'm using a dry brush technique here, where there's hardly any paint left in the brush. And then you gently stroke it along the blade to give it texture like it has been ground to shape, like it is a piece of metal that has been ground on a stone and still has some grooves and imperfections left in it. So I'm just brushing along the blade to get these desired texture. If you mess up at this point and paint something you don't like, don't worry too much. Just paint it over with black and start again. Too many layers of latex is almost impossible to have. The more the better. So now I'm going rectangular to the brushes I just did, and I just go along the edges. To hint at that this is the direction that the blade was ground on a stone. And I find it gives a nice two-tone effect on the blade. I do it like this. If it's still too dark after one coat of paint, you might want to do a second coat of paint. Just get a bit more dry brushing on this. What I also found is that after the weapon is finished, you can mix some of your artisan pigments, the artisan color, just with water. Just mix some black watercolor basically, and then paint the whole weapon black. And then you take a wet towel and wipe off most of it, and the black will only stay in the small crevices and imperfections and eventual carvings you did on your weapons, and give it a feeling of patina, of age. And that is a really nice effect as well, and quite easy to do. Yeah, I tried for the dry brush on the crossguard, but I took too much paint, and then just decided to go with it and paint the whole thing in solid bronze. That's why I'm now showing you the bronze dry brush on the pommel of the sword and the crossguard of the sword, and there's almost no color left in this brush. I'm just barely touching it and then going crosswise to give this the feeling like there was some wear and tear on this weapon, that it's actually old and black, but on the spots where it's often touched at the edges, the dirt has come off, revealing the bronze underneath. And I think, especially on this crossguard here, I get a nice texture going and give it a feeling of being an old and worn piece, and that makes it look less like a toy, more like a real thing. Now, after painting all of the latex, let it dry overnight, and the next step is the top coat, the seal, if you want to. Latex is a very flimsy paint, and it doesn't like sun and weather and oil and metal and basically anything it will come into contact with, so you need to protect it. And I'm using a product called Isoflex to seal it in. You just need one thin layer of Isoflex really, but because when you paint the first layer you always miss a spot, you have to look for the places where it is less glossy. That is where you need to apply more Isoflex. You don't want to apply it too thick, because then it will stain your blade yellowish. And also Isoflex is a nasty product. Don't get it in your skin. You don't want to breathe it in, so do it outside or in a well-aired room, or wear breath protection. Also, it dries out really quick, so I get it in very small quantities, just enough for one batch of weapons. Now I'm using talcum powder after the Isoflex is dried overnight, and this makes the weapon non-sticky. The latex weapons will stick to each other and anything really good if you don't put talcum on it. And here I'm cutting off the excess paint from the grip area and clean it off with cleaning gasoline. And now it's time to form the handle, to form the grip. On this small weapon, on this dagger, I cut out 2 pieces of PVC to make a small shell for the grip, to make it a bit wider and a bit thicker before I wrap it in leather. Sand all the surfaces you want to glue together, clean them. Now I'm using hot glue. I got it really cheap online, so I have no qualms about using a lot of hot glue. So I'm not only using it to glue these 2 pieces to the core, also use it to fill in these crevices that are still left. Here I'm just carving off the edges of the PVC with my carved knife. You could use your heat gun to form it, but be careful not to heat your latex up, not to heat the foam up, or to grind it, but again be careful not to grind your color of the blade. Now I'm cutting a strip of nice red leather and test if it's long enough to wrap the whole handle. And I cut it at a quite sharp angle at the end there to get it started. Then I just use hot glue and wrap it tightly. Cut it off at an angle again and secure the tip. And this gives me the dagger. This is silicone spray you can use to make your weapon non-sticky. and it leaves the weapon more glossy than the talcum powder. It will be really shiny if you don't put any talcum on it and just use the silicone spray. You can also use talcum or silicone spray to maintain your weapon. Always put silicone spray on your weapon before use and before storage, and it should hold for a good long time. Yeah, I'm doing the handle of the sword, and because this is a longer weapon, I'm doing it differently. I want it to be balanced, so I'm putting some weight in the handle there in form of some curtain cord, which is cord filled with lead. So it's weighted, lead weighted cord. And again, I'm using hot glue to fix it to the core, and I want my point of balance to be about a hand's width from the tang, from the cross guard. And here I'm again using hot glue as a filler material. I'm putting a lot on it at the end of the handle here where I didn't put any cord. And I also put a small ring of the curtain cord in the middle of the grip, which will give me a small rise right there once I wrap it in the leather, which is a feature, a stylistic feature you often find on these hand and a half on these bastard swords. And again, I'm cutting it off at an angle and wrap the rest. And that's it. If you liked this video, like it down below, let me know in the comments. Thank you, and goodbye.